start to crack into it, but as you probably just saw, Shannon just muted everybody just initially, just for some background noise. There'll be certainly some times, heaps of times throughout this week where everybody can jump in and ask some questions. The other thing too, we've got a pretty strong number of people. I think we're looking at 60-ish now, and I know there's another few still coming through, so we're looking at about 70. If your feed is, here's a couple more, if your feed is looking a bit glitchy, I'd recommend at the start just to turn your videos off for, say, the first portion, and then once we kind of get into the bit more open flowing in the questions, feel free to pop it on back then once you're coming in. So on that note, just so you all know, yeah, this will be recorded as well, as a couple of people just asked. So I've started that recording, and we've actually just set up the PGA Vimeo channel where a bunch of these have been put up. So I'll be sending those links out shortly. So thank you all firstly for coming, a really good number. I need to introduce not one, but actually two people today, which is very cool. Obviously we had Dr. Robert Neal, who everybody was on, we'd put out that was going to join us. For those of you who were at the coaching summit a couple of years ago, he was obviously over for that. Doc's been in the golf industry now for 30, 35 years maybe. He's also, I'm sure, there, but Doc was initially on some of the TPI biomechanics founding stuff, and runs a company with Karen, his wife, called Golf Biodynamics. They're really at the forefront of anything to do with the way the body works in the golf swing, and have been for a long time. So as always, I mean, I know Doc quite well, but every time I speak to him, I always consider it fortunate that I managed to learn something from him. So looking forward for him today. And we had a very late edition with Doc, which is awesome, Layne Savoie. So Doc and Layne seem to be the two who are the ones that have created the Wedgecraft series, of which is some of the stuff we've been posting about. So to give you a little bit of background on Layne, and I'm sure he can chip in too. So he's known Doc for about 10 years. He said he's been a coach over in the States, being in the NCAA. He was a college recruiting scout. He's currently working at the Greystone Golf Club over there in the States. So it's really nice to have him on board as well, certainly from the full-time coaching aspect of some of the wedge play. So I'm sure the two of them are going to dovetail quite nicely. So on that note, I'm saying if you, throughout the early stages, if you've got some questions coming in as it's going, post them through on the chat as per we have done in the past, and I'll make sure we can filter those on. And then, yeah, as we say, there'll definitely be some portions at the end where we can all jump in and start some conversation going. So on that note, Doc and Layne, as I say, thank you very much for being here, and yeah, we're looking forward to it.
So Josh, thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak to my New Zealand colleagues again, and that's been a nice chance. And I must admit I was remiss in not speaking to Layne about this until this morning, but fortunately he was able to join us. And so just a little bit of backstory on our connection. So you got the brief version from Josh, where we met when he was at doing some college player recruiting for the University of Arkansas. And it started up a friendship. And then about 7 years ago, he approached me and he said, look, I'm really interested to do some research in putting with another colleague of ours. And I kind of said bluntly to him that I wasn't interested in putting at that time, but if he was interested in doing some work in the short game area, I'd be only too happy to work with him on that. And that's really been was the embryonic stage of Wedgecraft. We didn't call it Wedgecraft at that point, but we decided to work together and put a plan that would really highlight what it is that's needed to be competent in the short game areas, because we felt like there was a dearth of quality material available for golf coaches and then obviously for players. And so we spent the best part of 4 years collecting data and then interpreting it and formulating it into something that was manageable. You guys saw, or those people who attended the coaching summit a couple of years back, really got the first glimpse at the sorts of things that we were doing there. And we've, I wouldn't say refined it, we've put it in a form that I think is much more manageable and interesting for not just golf coaches, but for players as well. And so having Layne on board here today is awesome because he brings a practical application to it that I don't have the experience that he does in that area. And so I'm sure you'll gain a lot of practical stuff from him as well. And I'm going to start the presentation today by sharing my screen. And Josh, we can make this presentation available to all of the delegates if they would like to. It's a big file, but I'm sure that they would be able to then go back and look at it later. So can everyone, oh, well, if you can't see my screen now, then please let me know and we'll, and we should get audio here as well, Josh. I don't know. Can people hear that or not?
So you might need to, Doc, when you share your screen, you can actually click on the bottom left-hand side, you go share computer audio.
And Josh, when I speak, does it come over top of the sound or not?
Yep.
So I think for most of you, this first part here is pretty straightforward. You've all known what the club delivery stuff is about, but we're going to go through it anyway. This is one of the first video features in the Digital Wedge workshop, so we wanted people to all sing from the same hymn book, and so we needed to have common language that everyone was familiar with. Just as an aside, Layne did most of the work on the video production work on this as well. So multi-skill, not just a good player and good coach, but he's quite adept at video editing as well. So you might well ask, or comment that, you know, these variables that we put up here as the control variables are no different for iron play or long game. And in some ways you're correct in saying that, because to hit any shot in golf, you need to be able to manipulate those variables in terms of club delivery. And these are all of the things that you as a player can control. What I'd like to do in the next part of the presentation, though, is to go through and show you why, or at least try to demonstrate to you why these control variables are so critical in wedge play. Because, and I think that one of the easiest ways, and Layne, you chime in at any time you like, all right, to look at this is to compare long game and short game here. And so at the top of our control variable tree or hierarchy, we've selected attack angle, because we believe that it's the most important variable for you to control if you want to become a good wedge player. If you have no control over your attack angle, then there are obviously parts of the short game that you just can't get to. And attack angle control means being able to go shallow or steep, depending on what the requirements are for the shot. And so what you would be trying to do if you had your 6-iron in your hand, and I've just picked out a couple of numbers here, is that you would be trying to deliver your 6-iron about the same way each time, you know, with an attack angle, whatever it is for you. Might be 4 down, might be 5 down. It doesn't matter, but it's in somewhere in that ballpark. You know, some of the faster club head speed players these days might be 6 or 7 degrees down with their 6-iron. But as long as they're doing that consistently, they'll be able to know what the carry is, what the spin is, and those sorts of things. All right. So the next thing, I'm just going to minimize that, is that in short game, what you would want to be able to do is not necessarily deliver the club the same way each time, because the shot requirements are different. So if you're off a really tight lie with firm grass, you might be able to go for a very, very shallow attack angle, sometimes 1 down or 2 down. That's about as shallow as you'd want to be. You don't want to be hitting it on the up. But then in rough conditions, you know, if the ball's buried down, then you might need an attack angle of 20 down. So whereas in long game, you try to do something the same each time. Now, on any particular shot, if you're hitting a 30-yard finesse wedge shot, then yes, you want to deliver the club pretty similarly each time, or otherwise you won't know how the ball is going to behave. But there are other times when you need to change the attack angle. And so that's an important aspect of skill development. And then we already know, and I think the audience knows, how important spin is in short game play. And attack angle is part of what we'll call the spin equation. So it's one of the variables that contributes to the amount of spin that you can create on a golf ball. All right, so it's not the only thing, but it's one of the important things.
Rob, let me
Yep.
Yeah, let me maybe add a different perspective. Greetings from Alabama in the States. I don't know if you guys know where that is, but hopefully one day I'll get to New Zealand. I wanted to add to this, give you some perspective from the attack angle and the wedge classification that Doc was just referring to. This is particularly important, the variation is important inside 30 yards, where you have the different lead edge orientations, the different lie angles for all the vast array of shots, and the distance wedges, say the 50 range to the 100 plate or so, that would be far more consistent, kind of like the 6-iron. Just for clarification, we had two focus areas in our study, one of which was distance wedges, and the other one was what we call the finesse zone. So we see different characteristics of attack angle in these two areas. So just to add to that.
That's a good point, Layne. Thank you. So if we, I think I need to just do something quickly on my computer here to get to here so that I can control this better. Well, it's not going to happen. Next slide. Okay. So this will give you some context here for the range of attack angles that you might expect in wedge play. And this is the averages of probably close to 12 really high-level wedge players. And so I think you've got to realize in standard square-faced fairway shots, people think about you know, an attack angle around 6 down would be normal. All right, so, and that's relatively shallow. Okay, so don't think that 6 down is steep. All right, and then clearly as you get past into the distance wedges, you'll get a steepening through 75, and then it starts to shallow out again until you get. I put normally 175 here. That's like a 6-iron. All right, just so that you have some comparative data with. So always this number here refers to a 6-iron because I think people are familiar with that. Anything there to add, Layne? Or are you good?
Just out of curiosity, Doc, what happens when these guys that hit 5-irons 230 like Tony Finau, what does that attack angle go to on their 6-iron? Just you made the reference that does the increase of like crazy speed like that cause the attack angle to spike?
It doesn't necessarily cause it to spike, but they can afford to have it steeper than someone who's got a lower club head speed. Okay. And the benefit that they derive from that is that they can spin the ball more with their 6-iron than a player who doesn't have as much speed. So they get a kind of a double whammy. They can carry it further, it has more spin, and then it will stop quicker. So, okay. So the next most important control variable is what we'll call shaft lean. And shaft lean, it's not identical to dynamic loft, but it's very close. And Layne and I had a very interesting discussion about this maybe 3 hours ago when we were going back over some data. And so if you're talking about square face shots, shaft lean and dynamic loft would be correlated like 1-to-1. Like if you go 10 degrees forward in shaft lean, then you would have 10 degrees less dynamic loft, right? But it doesn't happen quite that way when you start to open the leading edge. And so what you'll see in many very, very good finesse wedge players, and I'm talking like Luke Donald or who's the fellow, Tom Pernice?
Yeah.
Layne, yeah. They actually lean the shaft forward, or are capable of leaning the shaft forward a lot because of the way they present the leading edge of the club. And so the other important part is, again, with the finesse wedge shots, so the under 30, under 40 yard shots, these are carry distances. You will have, in the best players, the ability to control shaft lean. So they will vary it. So if they go to hit a flop shot, they might have 0 shaft lean. If they're hitting a square-faced 30-yard shot, they might have, I don't know, 8 to 10 degrees of shaft lean, or something in between there, depending on the club that they're using and so forth. But in the finesse wedge zone, you need to be able to vary that, and you need to be able to sometimes take lean off or add loft, and other times take the dynamic loft down. And so this shouldn't be in here. This should be dynamic loft as part of the spin equation. So I'll fix this up, Josh, and resend it to you. So instead of AA here, that should be DL, dynamic loft. With a 6-iron, you're just trying to present that club the same way every time. I mean, there are slight variations if you want to hit it high or lower, but basically your goal there is to be very, very consistent with the dynamic loft so that you can predict the carry distance and then the spin that you're going to get on the ball. Layne, anything further or go on?
Doc, you just said, just a good question from Andrew Gurney here. You said a minute ago, I picked up on it as well. You said that Luke and Tom present the leading edge in a special way. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Virtually for every shot, even though we ask Luke to play square face for some of the shots and open face for others. And I don't really like the term square face and open face because it's ambiguous. It's not bad when you're using a driver or a flat face club because an open face club means, oh, it's pointing for a right-handed player to the right. Well, with a wedge in your hand, if your club face is open, the ball will go to the right. If we talk about face angle that way. So what we prefer to be is a little more precise in our language with the wedges and say, where's the leading edge of the club oriented? Because if you're going to hit the ball on target, you have to have the club face square to the target, basically. So, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail when we get down to the face angle stuff, Josh, but basically, Tom Panisse and Luke like to set up and then deliver the club with a little bit of an open leading edge, but still a square club face to the target line.
Yeah, so is that's that component where you said to aim the loft rather than that leading edge? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So Doug, let me jump in and ask you a question because you're great at math, and this is maybe gives the coaches an idea of how I think compared to you. So when we're talking about shaft lean on a 6-iron compared to a wedge, we see that the 6-iron is relatively steady and you have a value of 10 degrees forward. If a great player were to present to the ball and let's just say the 6-iron flew 200 yards, which is a pretty common number on tour, the intended carry distance is 200 yards, yet he presented only 6 degrees of shaft lean. And so you have a big variable jump in there. The ball is going to go approximately how much difference in carry distance would that be, just quickly from your observations?
Approximately, there's 4-degree difference in dynamic loft. Then there's going to be about an 12-yard carry distance.
Okay, a 12-yard carry distance, and what percent change to the standard of 10 compared to 6? How big of a change is that? Basic math.
It's 40% change.
40%. Okay. So where I'm going with this is, from my perspective as a coach, players need to be able to go from 0 all the way to 18, and the percent change is astronomical. The responsibility, the control that people who want to master wedges and all the variety associated with all the different launch angles and all the varied spin rates, all the intention, all that creativity, the art form, the control necessary, it's got to be surgical. Whereas when you look at the full swing, it's like automated. And when you look at a wedge and all the different lies and carry distance and, like I said, face angle orientations and stuff, it's amazing to me how versatile people can be and how they present the club to the ball, people like Mickelson or Luke Donald and some of the others. So I always like to go bounce back and forth and think about percent change, not just what the number is, but percent change is massive when you look at it from that view.
Yeah, and Layne, I'm going to try a little later on to pull these concepts together when I talk about you know, varying these control variables and what the emphasis of the player needs to be on and how much they're accountable for in terms of the change. So again, just to put some numbers up there, you can see that shaft lean, minus just means that it's leaning forward, by the way. It's got nothing to do with that. Negative is not bad. Just, you'll see that as you get to 75 yards, the shaft lean, on average, for this group of players, gets more and more, and then beyond that, it starts to decline again. So if we move on from there, and dynamic loft, again, you'll have your greatest dynamic loft with the shortest shots, and then it will decrease as the shots get longer. So, and remember the demarcation between the finesse zone and the distance wedge zone is in here in the 30 to 50 yard bracket, okay? So, you know, there's a kind of a gray area. It's typical, you know, it's represented by this background here, as it turns out, where there are some characteristics of the mechanics in the 40-yard shots that are more similar to a distance wedge and others that are more similar to a finesse wedge. So it's a zone also that you'll find most high-level players don't like hitting shots from, the distance that they don't like hitting shots from. I mean, maybe if they have like a really simple shot, like a wide open flag and plenty of green to work with, that's fine. But when there's an emphasis on controlling that landing spot really precisely, I would say most of them are not very good in this transition zone between the finesse and distance wedge. Any comment there, Layne?
Yeah, that we're maybe let the folks know we've got a stopping power piece that can help explain further how you stop the ball at these varied distances. What are the primary means of getting the ball close to the hole, whether that be land angle or spin rate or a combination of, and that's a deeper dive into the chart Doc just put up there.
And then I just thought it would be worthwhile having a look at one player and saying, all right, well, you saw the averages. Here's Luke's data. And you can see that they're pretty similar. This was actually probably more surprising for Luke, the player, than most people. He has as much shaft lean as anyone on these short shots here. But I think that combination of an open leading edge then doesn't really give you an indication of what the dynamic loft, the true dynamic loft is in this particular case, right? So he's got an open leading edge, even though the shaft is lent well forward for his finesse shots, the ball doesn't launch at the same trajectory as someone who's got the same amount of shaft lean, but with a square leading edge. Right? The dynamic lofts are different there. It's quite interesting, but somewhat complicated because of the nature of the surface that you're using to strike the ball.
Doc, a good question just from Brad. That's assuming these shots are all hit with the same wedge?
Up until 100 yards. He changed club at 100 yards.
So 75 through 10 are all the same?
Yeah, 59-degree lofted wedge, static loft.
So Doc, I might add like a little bit to the Tom Pernice, Luke Donald piece, why they're a little unique. So if you think about the way a wedge is designed, if you hold all these wedges we have, vertical shaft at address, and then the club is sold at its lie angle. We're going to have the lead, just due to any bounce on the club. We're not making wedges these days with zero bounce. We all have a lot of bounce, it seems, and I mean, manufacturers can't even agree upon where to measure bounce, by the way. So just because the club is stamped with a number, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an industry standard like a loft is issued to a club. Bounce is very subjective depending upon the manufacturers on, again, where it's measured. But
Josh,
we do really—
is my screen visible or not?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and if it's not up on the right-hand side, people can just select to see speaker view and yours will pop up there.
Okay.
And so if you hold a wedge in kind of a neutral position is all I'm stating, a vertical shaft on its lie angle, you'll see that naturally the lead edge is higher than the contact point on the playing surface where the ball would be sitting. So in essence, you would have to lean the shaft forward enough, which would match the lie angle of the club in theory. If the lie angle, if the bounce was stamped 10 on the sole of the club, if you lean the club that far forward 10 degrees, then you have the lead edge flush with the ground. Okay, so it's basic math. Now, when a player like Luke Donald or Tom Pernice go to hit fairway shots off of tight lies, and they have an extreme open face bias where the lead edge is rotated way to the right, because of this, you see a very high lead edge compared to most other players who don't open the face. And so the only way to get that lead edge down so they have a mechanical fit on the golf ball is by leaning the shaft forward. Otherwise, they belly all of the shots from that starting and ending position. Okay? So that is, it's kind of like when Pernice was really kind of an outlier. He had a lot of open, I don't know, we've probably all watched Tom Pernice pitch the ball, and he gets a really open club face, and the ball, when he catches them solid, they come off really, really low and spinny from short distances. And to compound to that, he's got the handle really low. He's got the lie angle, the toe up in the air. And so to offset all of those numbers and all that geometry, he just ends up really leaning the shaft forward in the value of like closer to 20 degrees than 10 on a lot of his shots, which was pretty eye-opening. But that's the way that he gets the loft he intends to deliver to work for him with the lead edge orientation and the bounce and all those factors.
Any questions, Josh, or we got?
We've got a few. We're pulling some variables together. Even if you look at good one here, I guess a nice time from Fraser Wilkenau. He asked around the managing shaft lean and the attack angle relationship, if that has any effect on the sole configurations or the grinds that tour players are using. Are they leaning one way or another depending on how much lean they use?
Well, my first comment is that the grinds and bounces are really only relevant in the finesse zone. Once you start getting into distance wedges, it doesn't really matter what the shape of the grind is and all of that sort of stuff, because basically all of the distance wedge shots, unless it's a real specialty one that you're trying to hit, are hit with a square face. And clearly the bounce makes a little bit of difference in the turf interaction. So if you're leaning your wedge 15 degrees forward on a 75-yard distance wedge, then if you only had 6 or 8 degrees of bounce on that club, then it's it's a relatively sharp leading edge that's going to contact the turf, right? What Layne and I found out that was quite interesting when we went out to the Vokey workshop in California was that Many of the wedges that Vokey produces actually have more bounce on it than is stamped on the club. So just because it's got 14 on it doesn't mean it's actually 14 degrees of bounce on it. And just like Layne said, depending on where along the sole of the club from heel to toe, where you measure the bounce makes a difference as well. So getting back to the original question, Josh, so in the finesse zone, the grind and sole shape are huge because they will interact with how you present the leading edge and then how high the leading edge is relative to the turf in those configurations. So like you could have the same bounce on the club with a different grind and it'll play completely differently. And then you could have the same bounce but a different length of sole. So like a K grind versus an M grind, those two wedges will play completely differently when you open up the leading edge.
So is it then matching those configurations ultimately to the turf conditions and environment that you're playing in week to week?
Yeah, and then your level of comfort playing open leading edge configurations with your wedges. So for a lot of amateur golfers, we would tend to hear that they're not very comfortable opening the leading edge up, probably because they don't really know how to do it properly. And so we would take the view that if they're going to play square-faced shots mostly, then they would require a different set of grinds or bounces than someone who is very comfortable opening up the leading edge and changing the face orientation.
I mean, if you think about it, it's a pretty bad idea. I mean, for people who struggle to create shaft lean by the masses, it's probably a pretty bad idea to open the club face and raise the lead edge and take a swipe at it. So I think that, you know, that's why we have a lot of amateur golfers reluctant to explore that, because all they do is get negative feedback, in my view, from a coaching standpoint. If every time they open the lead edge, they belly the ball across the green, they're going to keep that lead edge pretty square. And so, yeah, I think shaft lean, to tie this all together, is a really important obstacle that people have learning to hit not only distance wedges and creating spin, but really just getting the club face on the ball at short distances.
So moving on to club speed. So again, we'll give you a bit of an example here. And Layne likes the percentages, so he might even jump in here for a little while. So let's say we go to a standard 6-iron. Tour average is still 92 miles an hour. It's hard to believe that they haven't changed in 10 years when I see how far these guys hit the ball. But maybe that's got to do with loft on their 6-irons compared to 10 years ago. But the average carry distance is about 183 yards. Club speed for the irons accounts for about 2 yards of carry for every mile an hour of club hit speed change, right? When you get a wedge in your hand, say a 60-degree wedge, and you're going to hit it from anywhere 10 through to 75 yards, you might see club head speeds as low as 15 miles an hour and as high as 75 miles an hour, which is a 500% change in speed. And I think just on the next slide, I'll let Layne talk through this one, because this is an example that we use actually in the Digital Wedge workshop. He does a little blackboard presentation here. So Layne, jump on here.
Yeah, so if we look at this, everyone, it's pretty common for the power player on tour these days to put up 100 mile an hour club speed and match match that carry distance at about 200 yards. So let's just say that that's a great number to get the ball close to the hole, the perfect number him and the caddy are going for. But in this particular example, for a variety of reasons, they decide that they have to kind of craft this 6-iron, take a little bit of speed off of it, and only hit it 191 yards, something in that territory. Well, that would require the world-class player, John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, that elite player to modulate his club speed in the territory of about 5 miles per hour, as Doc has noted here, okay? Maybe as little as 4 miles an hour. So that is only a 4 to 5% change. And it's not that John Rahm and Dustin Johnson and others alike can't do that. It's just difficult for them to do it. It's difficult for them to replicate it. And it's hard for them to execute that because they might have contact point issues. Their attack angle may vary. They have a plethora of things that come into play when you start changing speeds that much. So you, just like it's hard for them to a lot of times drop the speed on the driver and hit very refined shots at lower club speeds. So a 5% change, a simple 5% change compared to a wedge, as you can see the data here on the right half of the screen is minuscule, and you know that it's a battle for a very talented player to execute. Yet on the 60-degree club, you have to be able to go up and down the speed ladder, if you will, and be able to control 500% change. And that's why so many wedge shots look so good from the fairway, only to realize it's way long or way short. That's one of the many reasons. It's not a left and right issue. It's really about distance control and getting to be able to create a training system and a way of learning speed so you can deliver the ball the distance you want.
And then again, just to put this in perspective for the wedge spectrum, we did some robot testing at St. Andrews at the research center, and we systematically changed the dynamic loft and recorded all of the data, contact point, but we kept club head speed, attack angle, and path constant. So this was done on a robot. And we varied the loft from, I'll give you the static loft rather than the dynamic loft because I don't remember that off the top of my head. So we went from 60 degrees in 4-degree increments, so 60, 56, 52, 48, 44. And all of the other parameters were kept constant. And for the, did I get 56, 52? Yeah, so for the 52 gap wedge, at the swing speed we selected, the ball carried 75 yards. Has anyone got any idea of what the range of distances we saw in carry distances from the 60-degree wedge to the 44-degree wedge was? So 75 was middle of the range. The longest was X and the shortest was Y.
We'll see if anybody comes through with a few things on the chat here. I'm guessing it's going to be different than one would imagine. Yeah. We've got, first one is 12 to 15 yards, Kieran Jamieson.
Next.
3 yards per degree from Andrew Horan. He's a tireless fitter, so you're hoping he's on point so far.
Yeah, maybe they learned that from Layne and I.
Maybe.
So he's right. So it's about a 50-yard difference.
Wow.
Just with a change of 16 degrees of loft. So 3 yards per degree of dynamic loft. So if you do not have the ability to control your dynamic loft on distance wedges, you will never have good distance control. It's more important. It's 50% more important than club head speed in determining the carry distance of your distance wedges. So club head speed's about 2 yards per mile an hour. Dynamic loft is 3 yards per degree. And so they're different units, I know, but it's probably of that order of magnitude of importance in terms of controlling dynamic loft. So Layne, from a coaching perspective, what things do you do then to help players with their distance control?
Well, the first thing I would do is to really focus on establishing a consistent impact position, and you know, perhaps sometimes even they create a good impact position with a 6-iron, and maybe that's a good starting point, is to review that film and say, well, why isn't this happening on a wedge? Maybe it's intentional, but if they are not creating a good impact position on a 6-iron, then you have kind of a clean slate to say, well, we need more shaft lean through the bag. Let's learn how to do that at slower speeds where the learning can occur. And so we have done a lot of work with a prop called a launch gate, which is a device you can set up using plastic PVC pipe and foam, and you can get, based on the distance from the object, you can start to force your players to pitch the ball at different distances under this 30-degree margin. And so they're going to have to learn with perhaps, sometimes you can create more shaft lean at address. As we know, if we put the ball back, there's a little bit of compromise there, but maybe for the unskilled players, that's a decent starting point just so they can have some positive outcomes and get it under the 30-degree launch window. But I would spend a lot of time just building the shaft lean first. And then once that is established and they're confident and you're confident with the shaft lean, then and only then can you build a feel system of learning to control club speed concepts behind that. So the club speed concepts we would think come as maybe chapter 2 to learning the shaft lean.
That was a product too, wasn't it, Doc? Wasn't that the Ted Sheftick wedge gate? I think that you guys were. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if anybody's interested in what that looks like, if you just get onto Google or YouTube and punch in Ted Sheftick launch gate or wedge gate, you'll get an idea for what that looks like.
Yeah, and look, you're better off building it at home, because by the time you ship it to New Zealand, it'll be twice the price.
I think for everyone here, when you brought that up to us a couple of years ago, I've got this written down that Dominic Sainsbury said that he was just going to build some of those. So 2 years later, we're still waiting, but you know, this is like we might build into it now. Yeah, so just again from a coaching perspective on the use of the launch gates, I'll make a couple of comments. One is that obviously you need to use premium golf balls, or otherwise your launch conditions will be very, very different to the typical under 30-degree launch window that you would set. So if you're using a typical range ball, then the launch gate probably needs to be set closer to 38 degrees than 30. That's how much the ball makes a difference to the type of ball makes a difference to the launch. Secondly, you don't want to get people to start getting the ball to launch low just by hammering down on it more, so increasing the angle of attack, right? So that, if you look here at my hands, my left hand is the
angle of attack and my right is the dynamic loft. Well, if we hit down further with the same technique, then the spin loft is unchanged, but the ball will launch lower just because I've hit down on it more. So that's not a good solution either. So it really comes down to teaching people how the connection between arm and body needs to take place, and very importantly, the movements at the wrists in order for them to be able to lean the shaft forward at impact. And again, if we want to segue into that, we can certainly do some work in that area if you want. The last point that I'll make on this stuff here is that in dealing with players, I do a little bit of coaching. My goal at first is to do a lot of blocked practice with them and get them to be able to control the launch properly. So have them hit 50 or 60 yard shots. I mean, it can be for weeks, it doesn't really matter. But once they have the technique stable and they can deliver the right amount of shaft lean, then as Layne said, you can start building the speed ladder in order to control the distance the ball goes. But if they can't control the dynamic loft or the shaft lean, then they've got to solve a differential maths problem along the way to decide how much speed I need to deliver, given the fact that my shaft lean might be 2 degrees different on this shot compared to the previous one. So just too difficult.
Yeah. Doc, just a couple of questions there coming through at this spot. Yep. People are asking what tech is your club and ball data coming from? Some saw your stickers from the Foresight on the Wedge, some say your TrackMan. What are you still using now for all of this data collection?
Well, during the kind of the research phases, we primarily used TrackMan, but we found some serious limitations with it for wedge play. And so almost exclusively now for wedge play, I'll use the GC Quad. So it's just better on club delivery than the TrackMan.
Nice. I think there are a few GC Quads out here in New Zealand. Certainly, I know Matt Blackburn does those. So yeah.
And it's not that TrackMan's a bad device. I don't want you to get the impression that it's a poor device. It's got great software from a coach's perspective, and the Foresight isn't as good that way. But from a pure measurement perspective of club delivery, I think the GC Quad is a better device. And they're very, very similar on the ball, particularly if you put the TrackMan in normalized mode, because it's just a model that it's using anyway.
But that's
any other comment there?
That's because the GC Quad's actually purely measuring club data versus the TrackMan is what reverse engineering.
Yeah, it's kind of reverse. The TrackMan kind of used as a hybrid way of getting the dynamic loft and the face angle. It's based a little bit on the radar measuring the club speed, and then primarily the other characteristics are back engineered from what the ball did. And so they have to make assumptions about how much friction there is and all of that sort of stuff. And for wedges, it's not very good. I mean, I'm serious when I say it's not very good. Like typically 4 or 5 degrees different in dynamic loft measurements.
Well, and as we know, that's a lot.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. So. All good? Keep going? Okay.
Yeah, let's keep moving for now.
Yep. All right, and so again, you can see if you take the averages, club head speed monotonically increases as you carry distance increases, and so this is not a linear scale, by the way, right? It looks, there's not a linear increase in club head speed for carry distance, all right? So these are just bars down here. Because in fact, what happens is as you get less and less and less loft the carry distance per mile an hour increases, so that by the time you're getting to a driver, your carry distance per mile an hour of club head speed is about 3 yards. So just, although it looks linear, it's not. Okay, now we need to look at the next control variable, face angle. And so again, if we go back to your 6-iron or driver example, you're trying to deliver the same leading edge orientation every shot. Now, if you're hitting a little fade, then your path's just a couple of degrees to the left of the target, then your face angle, depending on how you measure it, face to path needs to be slightly open. And with a wedge in your hand, this is one of the most important things to understand, is that the leading edge is not representative of where the face is pointing. The only time it's representative of the club face angle is when the leading edge is perpendicular to your target line. Okay, and Layne, I might just see if I can quickly find a magnet that I can stick on the face of the club just to go through this example. I know it's done very nicely in the video.
Mm-hmm.
You want to just talk a little bit about this while I go and see if I forgot to get that thing ready.
Sure. And so I kind of give you a coaching perspective as Doc gets that piece, locates it. I tell my players, I feel like the good players that we watch on television, they're kind of masters at aiming loft, and they're not really aiming lead edge anymore. And so they imagine the club face kind of in a with no grooves, if it was just kind of slick face, and you'd have to aim that surface in the direction of your target, because such a large volume of the shots hit on tour, especially inside 30 yards, have an open club face orientation just due to how hard and fast the green surfaces are, how little moisture's in them. That's really the only way you're going to get the ball close to the hole. That's why kind of going back to maybe some of the shaft lean discussion and some of the launch angle references we've made, you do not see a lot of launch angles below 30 degrees at that 10 yards distance, because it's not compatible to a PGA Tour green. They're certainly capable of launching the ball under 30, but it would go running by the hole. And so naturally, instinctively, the players will match the shaft up a little bit different, so they get the little bit higher launch. They don't want the ball to slip off the face, so that spin loft is crucial, but you are getting slightly different launch angles there. And I going back to it, I think really learning to aim the club face and the loft is crucial. And Doc's going to try to show you what we call normal to the loft plane. I think is maybe about as technical as you can make it, but it's just 90 degrees to wherever the club face, where the contact point would be directed.
I need to get a decent background for you. So where the T is pointing, is that close enough there for people to see? Where the T pointing is the loft plane, what we call the loft plane, or the plane of the club face. And so when you rotate the leading edge open.
Just lift it up a little bit, Doc, just a tiny bit.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, when you rotate the club face open, obviously you add loft, and you now point the plane a little bit to the right of your target. And so typically what players will do then is to drop the lie angle in order to point the T toward the target. So if I do it in this orientation, maybe it's better if I do it this way. So square leading edge, rotate it. You might see that it's a little bit to your left now. It would be to my right, and then lowering the lie angle will bring the face pointing to the target. So in essence, the goal of every shot that you hit is to have the face plane pointing in the direction that you want to hit the golf ball.
So that would be as simple as what, dropping the hands a little bit at setup to...
Yep, that's well, definitely the most common way of doing it these days. The other thing is that you can reorient the path. So if for a right-handed player, we make the path go further left, even though we don't drop the hands, we can still get the ball to start at the target. And that's, but Layne might recall a really interesting conversation we had with Tom Kite on this one. So we were a little bit taken aback at first. So Layne, you experience.
So we set out to measure what we could feel like to be the best players in the world with the best technology and a really good process. And so we did beta testing on myself, and we were using shot length categories. We thought we had it all sorted, and Tom was one of the first guys we tested, if not the first. And we said, well, this is easy. We're going to tell them we want square face shots, and Doc's got a sensor on the club. We know it's going to be in the direction of the target. And then we're going to tell them to do an open club face orientation. And we thought we could tell guys to open the lead edge 10 degrees because we know based on the machine we had and now hit shots. So we would take all the subjectivity out of open club face and square club face. So we're doing this testing. And I mean, granted, we've got a Hall of Famer, Ryder Cup captain, and we don't know him well. I've known him for 20 years or so, 30 years, but still you're always on edge around the tour players. And we do the square face, no problem. And we say, Tom, now we're going to hit the ball higher. We need for you to open the club face. And we go back to our business and we start setting up, and he looks at us like, why would I do that? The ball's going to go to the right. Don't you want the ball to go at the target? And Doc and I look at each other. We're like, well, I'm not going to tell him that you can open the club face and the ball can go straight. I mean, he's Tom Kite. And so he looked at us, and then he demonstrated. He says, well, sure, if I open the lead edge and I swing, the ball's not going to go at the target. If you want me to do that, I can do that, but it doesn't make any sense to me. So we hit a snag in our testing pretty quick. And so I said, well, we want the ball to go higher, but however you need to accommodate that. Like, you just do what you need to do and we'll measure the ball going higher. And so at that point we had to differentiate, there are two different ways to effectively add loft to the club. And so he was more of the old fashioned, we would say, more classical type player, where he rotated his body to the left and got the face orientation with more loft, and then swung way left. And so that's when you see players appear to be way left of the target line, the intended target line, but the ball takes off and goes out to the right. That's when they have not really changed their lie angle of the club. So Tom hit all of his shots with effectively without manipulating the lie angle of the club. The other option that Doc was demonstrating with the tee and stuff and lowering the lie angle of the club would be more representative of like the way we know how Savoie hits shots, and maybe even created, was like a pioneer in like using the tool differently. You could get a lot more loft on the club and effectively aim it in the direction of the target if you lowered the handle a lot. And that's when the squatty knees and like Savoie said, he felt like he was riding a horse and hitting shots out of a bunker, all that descriptive language people use to get down and squat like a crab. That's what they're doing. They're able to add a lot of loft to the club. Lead edge is pointed way out to the right, like 40 degrees out to the right, yet the loft, because the lie angles changed so much, has then been redirected in the point in the direction of the target. And so those are kind of your two different ways. And then Actually, there's some people that do some kind of hybrid version of that where they do a little bit of both. They lower the handle and aim a little bit left, but they're blending the systems and they're getting more loft to aim in the direction of the target and hit it higher.
Question from Doug as well on the same spot around the influence of those two with contact point or where you strike on the face. So if you're hitting the open shots, if you're striking out of the toe, does that play any impact on club moving or gear effect or anything on that front in that relationship? Or
Doc, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah. So as soon as you open up the leading edge, you are going to be placed in a situation where the hosel is more exposed to the golf ball. And so I think in what good players do is they then creep the contact point towards the toe. So it's not a requirement, but it's an observation that we would have seen, and it just improves their margin of error for contact. The other thing that I wanted to say on the Savoie kind of technique is that I think when people started doing that, we began to see a lot of difference in the shaping of the sole of the wedges, because if you didn't get heel relief on the grind of those types of wedges, then it became increasingly difficult to be able to get sufficient lie angle change without having the heel of the club grab the turf. Layne, it looks like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, so I've got a like a replica golf bag I've been working on of Nicklaus's '86 Masters win. I've got everything in the bag mint, and so here's a typical 1986 grind, which is, let me pull the computer a little closer if I don't break something here. All right, so you can see how squared off that grind looks. Can everybody observe that? It's
just drop the wedge down a little bit so that it's against the background of your shirt, Layne. It's a bit easier to see then. Yeah, that's better. Yep.
Yeah, it's extremely squared off. There's no grinding. It's a short, shallow camber. If you were to, and it's a lot of bounce. If you like 12, 15 degrees of bounce, if and when players from that era of the 80s and 70s opened up that tool, the old Wilsons, all the stuff that they played in that generation of golfers, the lead edge would be so high, it would be really improbable that they'd do it anywhere other than probably the bunker in the rough. They're incapable of hitting high soft shots off the fairway without a lot of luck, and it just wasn't going to work. The tool did not fit. And then secondly, I think as the green speeds got really faster and the green surfaces got a lot more difficult with agriculture technique changing, the agronomy changing, they had to create a different array of shots also. And I think you saw all of that kind of evolve in the 90s and certainly present day, but we feel like there's an old technique and there's again a demarcation line. Doc used that earlier, and then there's a modern technique. We feel like that transition was kind of introduced during the Savoie period, and obviously he influenced a lot of short games, and he was well studied. So I think that the old wedges don't even allow you to do a lot of the shots with perfect form. It's just the tool was off. And so that's where Vokey has really been a leader with, Vokey, they have maybe 22 grinds, if not more. I think it's really critical to match the release patterns, the surface conditions, and so on. And all of that just gives you more versatility to getting, the proper loft on the ball for the shot you want to hit.
Layne, a couple of people coming in with the ball tech. Fraser and Andrew Gurney around the ball tech make a difference, and Fraser rightfully so said nobody can spin it like the Shark did in the 90s.
Well, Doc's really good on the ball. Yeah, I think that what we see on the ball, I'll give you my input and I'll turn it over to Doc, is that you basically, the real science in the golf ball, having been through the Titleist factory here just a few months back with Doc, it was enlightening. All the patent work, all the real essence, the money, the machine behind it, I think is spin. It's all in the skins of the golf ball these days. I mean, if you look, you can get a golf ball to go pretty far cheap. However, you can't get, for that price point, you can't get the ball to spin around the green. I think people, when you say performance and what you're paying for, I think spin is what you're paying for when you buy a Pro V1 or something that's a tour quality golf ball. You're paying for tour performance and spin around the greens.
Yeah, I don't think I can really add much. It's the quality of the material. It's in the cover of the golf ball that primarily determines how it spins. And they can make golf balls that would spin twice as much as the ones that are on the market at the moment. But they wouldn't carry as far in with the driver, so they wouldn't perform as well in the driver. So it's a very difficult engineering problem, because the characteristics that you need for spin are at the opposite end of the spectrum to the ones that you need for distance. And so they're always trying to tread the line between these two, and so just difficult to do.
It is kind of interesting. I will say that Titleist and the manufacturers, we've done some just kind of interesting testing, nothing truly scientific, but I bought on eBay new old stock Titleist 384 Tours, never been hit before, still in the box, virgin, and I had mint wedges. I went and worked with Jason Duffner, and I said, I want you to hit the Pro V1 on a batch, and then I want you to hit these 384 Tours on a batch. And I asked all kinds of people, I said, what do you think is going to happen when he hits these tour balladas, these true ballada balls? I mean, I was thinking the TrackMan might blow up. It might have 13, 14,000 RPMs, because we know how much the ballada used to spin and its characteristics. And in fact, the findings after 12 shots in a set is that he spun the Pro V1 more than he spun the tour ballada. And so in essence, over the 30 years in the materials and the evolution of science and patents and everything, they've got the golf ball to go a lot further, spin less off of a driver, and ironically spin more around the green. That's how good Titleist and those guys are.
All right, let's move on, Josh, unless there are other questions.
No, that's good. Let's keep moving.
Yep. So face angle. You do see this little pattern, Josh, where the tour players are slightly left. Sorry, this is face angle. Slightly open. So let me just put this in perspective for you here. So these face angle measurements here have, for the short shots, have been taken from the GBD data, because the TrackMan 3 wouldn't pick up this stuff. And I don't know if I'd believe it anyway. Well, no, I do know if I'd believe it, but I won't say any more. So in, and just as a little bit of the backstory here. So when golf coaches talk about turn during the swing, Josh, so they would talk about like going into the backswing, and that was closed, right? So you would be more closed at the top of your backswing than you would be at setup, and you'd be open with your body at impact, right? So that's how I set up the measurement system to be consistent with what golf coaches were used to. But they made it very difficult for me, because when they talk about the club, the sign is opposite. An open club face is pointing to the right. You rotated in the same direction as when you closed your body, but they call that open.
That's negative.
And when you pointed the club face to the left, an open body, but a club face that pointed to the left, they call that a closed club face. So rather than have an inconsistency in the measurement system, minus here, not like TrackMan, minus in this GBD measurement system means an open club face. All right. So the club face is marginally open, a degree, not very much. And for all intents and purposes, on these shots, you could virtually say it's 0. Okay. So, but there is a slight bias towards open with the players that we measure. All right. When we go to club path, which is the next slide here, again, I'm going to go to the data and then come back to the discussion here, and because Layne does a really nice job on this. This is a typical pattern that you would see in club path with the high level performance. That for the shorter shots, the club path, TrackMan, Foresight, Flight Scope numbers are to the left, right? So a path that's to the left for the short finesse wedge shots, and by the time you get out to the distance wedge shots, then the club path is pretty neutral. So Layne, if I go back a slide now, if I can, here we go. Talk to the audience a little bit about you know, 6-iron wedge, path, those sorts of things, okay? Because you have some nice drills that you do with people here as well.
Right. So, as you know, we're not going to have a tremendous path difference, just kind of going to our baseline, what people are very familiar with from coaching standpoint, the 6-iron, the driver. We would not see a lot of variability there. Obviously, the closer we get to 0, for the most part, the more desirable it is. We could build in certain patterns of 3 and 4 degrees of bias if people want to shape the ball a certain way, but there's not large swinging values to opposite sides of the scale. I think we universally as coaches would recognize that. However, in a wedge, you need to be able to do that, and you need to be able to do it far beyond probably we could comprehend as we again compare them to the 6-iron numbers. We need the magnitude of as much 10 degrees to the left and 10 degrees to the right, and let me touch on why that would be. And so a perfect place that you would see this would be probably like Royal Melbourne or Pinehurst number 2, or even the Players, a British Open golf course where you get a lot of uneven surfaces that you're landing the golf ball on. Augusta, where you're pitching from a lot of uneven lies to rounded surfaces, and so these little humpback, turtleback greens. And so Players would say take a 60, like I was at the Players with Jason Duffner, and he would work the greens. The ball would go through into collection area, and he's down behind the green or beside the green, left or right, and he'd be short-sighted. And so you have a couple options. You can go up in the air, or you can stay on the ground. Well, he's going to use both options with one club, but the only way he would really do that effectively is if he could change his club path, meaning that if he were to go up in the air, he would pivot the lead edge open pretty dramatically. He would drop the handle a little bit, as we previously discussed, to get the loft to point back in the direction of the target, and he would start swinging leftward. And that value we might see in the neighborhood of 10 degrees. Especially you'll see this value go to say 10 degrees if they're hitting a really super spinny golf shot from 30 to 40 and 50 yards. The secret sauce, that magic zone where they just wow people, how much the ball spins, is when they start swinging a lot harder. they have the ability to go a lot harder left with an open face and a lot of shaft lean. And so it's kind of like they're hitting a slice with an open face 60 degree. And that's the ball that can really like spin back from 30 and 40 yards we see. And you can get 10,000 RPM from a distance you normally see 10,000 RPM would be maybe 80 yards. They're producing it at almost half that distance. And so they're creating a very oblique strike with the path going way leftward on a 60 degree club. And that's the only way that they can do it is path leftward. And the other side of the spectrum would be it, and Duffner's back in that same collection area and he's got his 60 degree out. If he did not want to go up in the air, he would manufacture a shot. And we've all seen them do it, put the ball off their back foot, put the club face in the direction of the target at address and kind of hit a trap, shaft lean forward, low hooking 60 degree that kind of hits in the face of the hill, jumps up with a little check on it and trickles out to the short-sided pin. And both shots are very effective, a full-on flop where the path is going way left or a checker into the hill. The reason why they like to hit a 60 degree, in my opinion, a checker into the hill with a 60 and the path going way to the right is because they like using consistent shaft lean values of like, say, 20 degrees of shaft lean is far more comfortable to a player with a strong grip like Duffner than, say, taking an 8-iron out and producing the same spin loft, if you will, and bumping it into the hill. But his spin loft and his shaft lean dynamics would need to go into a very uncomfortable zone for him. So he hasn't trained in that 5-degree shaft lean window. He's trained a lot more in the 20-degree shaft lean window. And so that's why those guys take a lot of loft and bump it into the hill. And that's when that path is going, 10 and 15 degrees to the right. And so you have this huge variance of 20 and even 25 degrees of using a 60 degree on very short distances and creating very different styles of shots.
Okay, so now last thing.
Doc, before you jump into another one, just a question that passed by that I should have asked a minute ago from Richard Lee, who's a pretty serious player himself. If you go back to the opening and the closing of the club face, for say different wedge shots of heights and distances, he found he didn't enjoy that method of doing it. He said that he very much felt like the balance of the club head was changed throughout his swing. Have you ever spoken to anybody else that might have had that similar thought around that opening and closing changing where the center of mass of the club head might sit?
Are you talking about at setup here?
I think it's at setup, yes. So altering the amount of, say, opening and closing of the club face.
So leading edge?
Changing the leading edge, sorry, yeah. And then that having an impact of, I guess when he talks about balance, he might be talking about his timing or maybe some sort of sequencing that allowed him to create in that short game.
The short answer is I don't know that we explored that question with anyone. But Layne, have you heard any commentary on that at all?
No, other than I'm always kind of shocked at how much the lead edge is open and rotated away from square on bunker shots and flop shots. When I watch it on television, I'm just, as much as I study it, I'm still awestruck by some of how much open club face people are hitting on some of these pitch shots, certainly in the bunker and short-sided scenarios out of the rough and stuff. Not necessarily the fairway, but the high-speed stuff with a little bit of air under the ball where you have the medium of sand and rough. I see extremely open face where maybe the mass of the club is really away from an unnatural position as maybe as he's described, but I've never heard any comments on that.
Yep. And he might get him to jump at the end, might be able to explain it a bit better than me for sure.
Yeah, and then one other thing that I would know from the physics, Josh, is if we do rotate the leading edge open. That's going to move the center of mass kind of back behind the shaft more, which means then that when you do start applying forces to the shaft or to the handle on the downswing, the orientation of the shaft then and the location of the center of mass will have a massive effect on the torque that's generated and how then the club responds. Because if the center of mass gets below the club plane, basically the plane that the club's moving on, the torque to close the club face is massive. And the opposite could happen as well, is if the center of mass is above the plane on which the force is applied at the handle, then that thing will actually turn the club face the opposite direction. So I wanted to open it. So I could understand how he might, it's Richard, right?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, how Richard could, a sensitive tour player would really feel those differences, whereas typical players at my level or
most of our level
wouldn't have that same sensitivity to changes in mass. I mean, it's quite remarkable, for example, when you work with the tour players, how much just putting a few grams in the sensor on the shaft, even though it's close to the grip, they go, wow, this feels so different to me. And so it doesn't only affect the swing speed, it affects their sensitivity to what the club's doing during the swing as well.
Nice, thank you.
The second last control variable that we'll speak about is contact point. And I think we need to just clear up a few myths that surround this, as well as shedding light into where contact is typically desired on the wedge shots. So if we again compare the 6-iron, you're trying to hit it in the same place at the club. So you've got a predictable carry distance, curve, and spin. So we don't want to vary the location that we hit the ball on the club face with long clubs. And however, with a wedge, we have some different options that are available. And so for your distance wedge shots, you probably, by and large, want to hit pretty close to the center of mass. That's what CM is there, center of mass. And to become a kind of a master wedge player, though, you need to be able to learn to hit the ball with different parts of the club face. And if we look at finesse wedge shots, I would say typically the players that we've measured hit it slightly low on the face and definitely towards the toe. And so you'll see wear marks on their club, more in that zone that's probably 2 centimeters towards the toe and a little bit below the center of the club face, or where the center of mass would be. And so we did some pretty serious investigation of this, and the slide hasn't come out particularly well, but we did robot testing again, and I'll tidy the slide up, Josh, before I send you the final version. But if we looked at spin rates over the entire surface of the club, so there are 17 different spots here, the spin rate is about the same for the same club head speed and club delivery. So the loft and attack angles are the same. So hitting it on a different section of the club face doesn't change the spin rate. Okay, got to get that firmly in your head. And so then you might ask the question, can you see my pointer at all or not? Or do I need to?
No, I think everybody can see it.
I think this would be the typical region where the tour players will hit their wedge shots from. And you have to go and say, well, why would they do that? And I'm going to say that there are two major reasons. One is that the lower down on the club face you can strike the ball, the less chance there is of material getting between the ball and the club face. And that's the thing that changes friction the most. And friction is required to create spin. So by hitting it down low on the face, you increase the predictability of the shot that you're going to create. The second reason is that as you hit it towards the toe and low on the face, then to hit any one distance, you need to swing the club faster. So you need to swing the club faster to hit a ball 30 yards when hitting it from this spot, as opposed to, I wonder if I can change color here, than if you hit it right out of the middle of the club. And it might be probably as much as 4 or 5 miles an hour different in club head speed. And speed and spin are correlated. So the higher the speed, the more spin. So if you hit it low towards the toe, to hit the same distance carry, you need more club head speed, and so you're going to generate more spin. So that's the reasons we believe that that's the preferred location for contact point. Layne, anything to add to that?
And that is, again, finesse wedges. This is not something that you would want to explore on distance wedges. So inside 30 and 40 yards.
You know that specialty shot that Layne talked about, that 40-yard wedge shot that spins at 10,000 plus RPM? That one has to be hit, let me go, almost on the seam here, with a club path that's probably, and I'm not joking here, 20 to 30 degrees left. And lots and lots of shaft lean. And massively open leading edge. So, I mean, the tour players don't choose to hit that shot when they've got unless it's the only thing left open to them, because that's a really high risk, high skill shot. I mean, Layne, just as an example, Layne, when you were with Duffner and he was hitting these shots, and then you said, look, and Layne's a good wedge player. Describe that story for him.
Which one?
You said, how do you do that, Duff? And then you went in and you set up exactly the way he did, and you went, holy smokes, this is so much fun.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I think that the fast track to doing this is get your body out of the way. I think that even though people understand that the club has to travel left, inevitably their left thigh, their lead leg is in the way. So I would encourage you to, first off, remove the left side of your lower body from the equation, pull your toe line back to your heel line, lean left at address, and then because you need so much shaft lean, it's okay to put the ball back. Now, you don't want to get the ball too far back because then your attack angle will start to spike, and that will push your club path and your launch direction too far right. But you do need a blend. It's a cocktail of open face, path way left, and a ton of shaft lean. And so if you were to do that with a 7-iron or a driver, you would hit a really low, hard hit slice. And then if you were to put in the cherry on top of the cocktail would be the contact point stuff, you could start to become, your smash values would start to drop more and more. Okay, the more you hit your 7-iron on the toe, and then you start to realize, wow, I can hit a low slice that doesn't go anywhere with my 7-iron. And so put it in terms of the full swing of what you're doing. You create that recipe with a 60-degree club. Now, I've seen this shot hit by quite a few people. It's not exclusive or unique to Duffner. I've seen VJ do it a lot. I've seen Luke Donald do it some. The hardest thing of the whole piece is they're really not hitting the ground very hard. They could virtually go to a putting surface and hit a 10,000 RPM golf shot. It sounds clicky, it sounds teethy, it doesn't sound normal. You know it's different, and it's kind of a skidding of the bounce on the surface of the green or the tight lie. Of course, a tight lie helps them because they have less foreign material interaction between, they have higher friction, as Doc's mentioned. It's easier to get the contact point correct. It goes down the face, the tighter the lie. So a mat, by comparison, you'll hit it too high on the face sometimes using a mat, practicing this motion. But yes, that's what they're doing. And it's very unique. It's special to see, and it's crazy to hear the ball spin like that and hear that contact.
Doc, I'm sure this was Mariano Bartolome. I'm sure he used to do this shot out of divots next to bunkers at the Jim McLean School for years. And I think Andy and I must have worked on this for 3 months straight and still couldn't call. Maybe we hit a 1 out of 10. So it certainly wasn't going to get put into play in our tournaments, that's for sure.
That's right, yeah. Really high skill level.
I would say that to add to that, and so that's like that's the upper spectrum of spin. And the reason why it's important for these good players to have that shot is it gives them more offensive weapons and more scoring ability at greater distances. And so if a player can cheat the scale and get to 50 yards from the green and get in a bad spot, and he can produce an 80 or 90 yards of spin, then he can outplay the guys a mere 2 or 3 shots or opportunities in a week where the other players can't get the ball up and down. Ricky Fowler or Jason Duffner have an answer at that time. And so I think that if you look at spin in the same equation that you would look at distance and club speed, the more spin that can be generated at shorter distances, the greater offensive weapons you have with wedges. And so, I think the perfect pairing is an immense amount of power with a high spin generation inside of 100 yards.
And then our last control variable was intellect. And I like to think about it as knowing what the best shot for you to hit is in any particular circumstance. So if I don't have the same set of tools as Ricky Fowler or Phil Mickelson, I might be able to see the shot that they hit there and go, wow, yeah, that would look really good. I could imagine how that would work here, but I have no chance of executing that shot. So being able to choose the right shot for me at any particular time is important. And I think this is of massive importance in the finesse zone. This is where you get multitudes of shot possibilities for any given scenario. Ball in a certain place, pin in a certain place, green complex. There might be, a finite number of shots that are possible that would work there. And the greater your skill level, then the better off you're going to be. So as Layne described it, you have the ability to hit different shots that someone else might not have, but then being able to choose the right one given the circumstances is important as well. So if it's a practice round, maybe you can do that. If it's a tournament final round, back 9, maybe that's not the right choice because the consequences of a poor execution may be too dramatic at that point. So Layne, anything else to add on intellect?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the kind of the throwback players that you see up the board at Augusta time and time again. I mean, the most obvious example of that would be Fred Couples. Fred Couples is not beating these guys up at 55 years old with his 7-iron prowess and his phenomenal driving. At that day and age, everybody, all the young guns are probably hitting oftentimes that week at Augusta where he was way up the board. They're better. They're managing drivers and 7-irons and performing better in a lot of these categories. Where he is skinning them alive, though, is on the intellect, where he knows what shots he has to hit for the greens and those pin locations to be receptive. And I think that's probably as good an illustration as I could say. The Tom Watson effect at the British Open, the Bernhard Langer effect at the Masters, where you see the old wise owls being able to know how to get the ball up and down when you're long of the green at 13 at Augusta. And what shot to hit to that pin is very important. Not only can they hit the shot, all of their experiences have contributed to them not learning that shot, refining that shot. And that's why you see the young players just, shadow the older experienced players at those certain events like Pinehurst #2. There's certain green complexes and certain golf courses that require a very high level of intellect. It's not just a heavyweight boxing championship. You got to have all the nuances and stuff. So I think it just kind of struck me back 20 years ago when I first got on tour as a coach. We'd play a lot of practice rounds with VJ at the time, and I was always blown away by how many different ways he could get the ball up and down from the same location. And it kind of struck me, like watching Duffner pitch in his rookie years. I said, man, Duffner's only got one shot here, and he feels so much pressure as a result of it. Like, I've got to be perfect. And VJ would walk to the same spot and hit like 4 different shots, all to gimme. And I'd be like, man, those are all different launch angles, all different techniques and forms. And he feels so relaxed doing it. It's like he's always got a big playbook to use.
So, yeah, that's interesting, the 4 different shots. One question, Layne and Doc, and I think, Doc, you might have brought this up. Well, I think you did when you were back a couple of years ago from Simon Muckley around DeChambeau's Spritz guy came to light. And I know you did do a bit of stuff on the wet versus dry and some of the data that you were collecting.
There have been, I've heard, and not my own testing, some improvements in wedge performance, like the ping wedges under wet conditions have improved. It's still never as good as under dry conditions. The micromachining and the groove configurations and so forth have been tweaked to actually, and actually not just the configurations, but how they're manufactured as well, have been able to get some small increments in performance under wet conditions. But just be aware that you can never get the same performance in wet conditions as you can from dry conditions. Even if the ball is dry and the club is dry, but the surface underneath is damp, wet, it's, I don't want to say impossible, but nearly impossible to get the same performance because moisture gets in between the ball and the club face, and that really brings the friction down a lot. So that's all I've got prepared here, Josh. I know that there's probably 10 minutes left before 7 and I have to duck out, but there's, Layne and I have spent the last couple of years putting together this digital wedge workshop that's available for download at wedgecraft.com. And it's nowhere near as comprehensive as stuff that we could do with you on an individual basis. But I think that as coaches, you would find many of the activities and drills and exercises valuable for exploring maybe your own wedge play, but certainly to help you with your students. So, and I think it's relatively cheap. I don't know what it is in New Zealand dollars, but it's $2.99 US a week for 12 weeks. So it's not very much. And there's about over 3 hours of video content that Layne and I put together on that stuff.
And when he says $2.99, that's $2.99. Not $200.99.
Website and see what you can find.
I'm a couple of weeks into it. It's really interesting. I've written down a bunch of questions from even the first couple of sessions and then I think a part of that you actually run some as a monthly webinars where you guys jump on and you can answer anybody's questions and go through a bunch of stuff as well.
Yeah, so we just released this workshop about a month ago, and Rob and I are organizing a webinar topic that we're throwing together in the next couple of weeks, where we're going to try to get the community of subscribers. Right now, we've got approximately 35. We've sold about 35 of the products, so that we're off to a decent start. And we're going to have a format like this where we choose a topic. For instance, one of them will be smash. So what are the contributing factors to smash, and how would that be relevant to different shots in the short game? So I know that will be a topic. I don't know what we'll begin with in the next week, but any of the subscribers would be notified by email of what the topic would be, and they'll all be recorded and embedded in our website as previous offerings, viewing.
Hey, Josh, I don't know if you can, oh, sorry, Layne. You cannot, but my headphones are different. I'm going to go and get another pair.
Sure. Layne, a couple of questions maybe that you can jump into. I'll save a couple here for Doc as well when he comes back. If we're looking at some generic coaching stuff, and a question that popped up earlier, now obviously there's a whole ton of variables around it. If sight unseen, you were to say, hey, let's fit you out with a few edges, 52, 56, 60, any bounces that you would kind of recommend for the typical club golfer based on the type of shots that they would be playing?
My starting point would be, I would want them to, if they really didn't have the ability to lean the shaft forward at all, they probably never need to open the club face, like I stated earlier. And so this is kind of like a process of elimination. They don't have a problem getting the ball up in the air. We're talking about 15 handicappers. So I teach at a country club. I see a vast array of talent. I go out on tour on some weeks, and then I have to teach people to break 100. So I see a lot of different impact positions and afflictions. But what you're trying to do through my eyes is say, can he produce the environment he needs to spin the golf ball? Okay. Some people can't. Some people cannot lean the shaft enough, period. I'm starting there. That's like level one. We're just trying to get contact on the face. So I wouldn't let that individual open the club. I would get a bounce that is going to help them glide the club through the grass and say moderate. I wouldn't use a high bounce because the lead edge sits higher at address oftentimes on a high bounce club. And so I would stay in the 8 and 10 zone on that player. But then you kind of get someone with a skill set, and maybe they do like to open the club a little bit. And so I like to look at how much someone is capable of opening the clubs. A lot of time I'll ask someone to open the club, and they'll say, I've got the club face open. All they did is move their body left. And I said, I'm ready to go, but they didn't change the club face orientation. And so I have found people are very reluctant to open the club face, and they're usually definitely in the single digit zone, if not lower, before they really start to understand opening the club face whatsoever. And so once they start opening the club face, I immediately go to recognize, well, do they lower the handle when they open the club face? Do they have that inclination? And so at that point, I go, well, he's capable of using a grind where maybe some of the heel is taken out. And that's just kind of my starting point with people is I start real basic, get the ball on the face, and then I just kind of watch what they do. Are they capable of opening the face? Are they capable of lowering the handle and being comfortable and getting the club on the ball still and so on? But I've found it bizarre, truly, as much as we've studied wedges, Doc and I, that we go to Titleist and we work with Bob Vokey himself, and nobody has great answers for wedge fitting. I mean, it's kind of like it's people at Titleist watch Bob Vokey fit, and you'll say, what did he just do? And they go, I don't know what he did, but he ended up with an M grind. You know, and there's no formalized process, but I do think you need to work with the patterns you see that are established at address and at impact, and try to fit with their release pattern and maybe the environment that they play in.
Yeah, nice. And Doc, very last question for you, because I know you got to get out of here quickly. Just one quick one: mat versus grass for practice or fitting?
So practicing off a mat will probably give you an illusion of expertise that you don't have. So if you want to become a good wedge player, you need to hit off turf and learn how to deliver the club properly on those conditions. It's, I would say, probably acceptable to use a mat if you've got someone who is really struggling with contact, so someone who maybe has the yips, to give them a little bit of a buffer there where the club will bounce a bit off the mat and not give them just the horrible results that they would get off grass. And I believe that the club delivery changes a lot with mat versus the grass as well. And so it might be okay to do some distance wedge work for a little while off a mat, controlling your launch and getting your shaft lean right. But as soon as you can get onto turf conditions, you will be better off.
Nice. All right, and look, yeah, for everyone that is there, as I said, that wedgecraft, it's pretty cool. There's a lot of really good drills and a lot of really good games and activities and stuff you can work on that will bring some of this to life. Now, I know I've certainly written down a whole bunch of stuff, and there's even a ton more questions coming in. So I think I'm going to have to do a bit of work, sweet talking you two to get one or both of you back at some point in our lockdown. So I'll do some work on that. But I really appreciate both of your time. It's been amazing. There's so much information there that there's tons of people I'm sure would have taken away. And as we said, we'll be sharing that kind of slides and some of the information and some of the notes that we've annotated as well. And we'll get those out to everybody pretty shortly. So on that note, Doc, I know you need to scoot, and Layne, I really do appreciate you both here. So thank you very much.
Josh, thank you again.
Thank you, Josh.
And I'm going to speak only on behalf of myself. I'm happy to do this again for you in a few weeks' time if that's something that you want to explore. And I gather Layne would be right in there with me, but I won't speak for him.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me. It's a great platform. Always enjoy taking a good look at this stuff, and I'd be happy to do that. I do have probably a good 30 minutes I could spend on stopping power. As I mentioned, I already have a presentation prepared from a couple months ago I did with Mark Blackburn's staff where I work. But it's kind of the problem or a look into whether people stop the ball with spin or land angle or both, and as they occur, and what are the influences around friction beyond technique. And so anyway, that's how that would be framed.
I mean, look, yeah, I've certainly got nowhere to go. So if you're around, I'm here, that's for sure.
Well, thanks for having us. You guys have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.